The Rockpile Report.
Buffalo, New York is going to be the epicenter of every stargazing nerd's wet dream.
With Buffalo Bills season ticket holder, Drew Geter.
If there was ever a time to break out Skyline Chili, it's when the Bills are 5-2, right?
The Rockpile Report. The pettiest, hardest drinking Bills podcast.
To another edition of the Rockpile Report podcast. I'm your host, Bill's season ticket holder, Drew Geer. That's my producer, Chris Kruger. Riding shotgun with us tonight, Mr. Ryan Lasel from Rock Sports Network, man. And the hashtag Sports and hashtag Nation.
Hashtag Nation.
I don't.
Shout out.
What are the other, Chris? So there's all these tropes. Like, you're a producer, and guys have been doing this. Like, it's been a radio thing. Like, I remember as far back as Opie and Anthony, there was the O&A Army.
Yeah.
And there was the O&A Army, and there was the like, who else? Who else has gone by like Nation? I mean, there was the Nation of Domination, but that was a whole different thing.
Jet Nation.
Yeah, I'm not going to associate myself with the Nation. I think that's cultural appropriation is what that would be called. So.
But yeah, Jet Nation. Like,
yeah.
There's an awesome clip of Joe Bonigo just going, there is no Jets Nation. Just like yelling like a grumpy old man.
You guys have learned that over the last few months that you've been doing the YouTube lives, that hashtag Nation is very much alive and very much a thing.
Do they like being called hashtag Nation?
Mario keeps doing it, so I'm assuming somebody would have told him to stop. Spin or one of those guys, I'm sure, would have said something if they wanted him to stop.
It always, Chris, it's always something I question. Like, do people actually like being called this? I don't like belonging to things. I don't.
Don't lump me in with these people.
Well, that's it. I constantly find myself, anytime I'm part of a group and everyone goes, hey, look, this is a tribal thing that human beings are supposed to do. We're supposed to seek out other like-minded individuals over, regardless of what the thing is that binds us. We're supposed to be looking for these things. And instead, I find myself, every time I get put into a box with a bunch of other people, I just look around and go, fuck, I don't want to be like them. I'm not one of you. I don't want to be here.
You don't want to lose your individuality. It's what makes you individually you. Chris, you notice I got him doing the mic thing now, too.
I know.
I'm test driving.
I'm telling you, man.
I'm test driving it to see if it's comfortable.
I would say tweet at us, or if you want to, comment down below what is the term that we should be using here at the Rockpile Report.
Call in if you know.
Is Rockpile Report Nation? Rock Nation?
Rock Nation? I don't think
Rock Nation, again, maybe cultural appropriation.
Also copyrighted?
Yeah, probably.
We're not trying. I mean, we've been pushing the envelope here and there, but we're not trying to get sued. And also, like, I don't know.
You could just go by, like, the rock pile, right? Like, the pile would indicate multiples of something.
Yeah, but you know what that's too closely connotated to is the wood pile. Do you know what the wood pile is?
Yeah,
I don't want anything to do with any of this.
Okay.
I'd be interested to see what our listeners think about this. But
you guys have a strong following. I bet you'll get some recommendations.
So, yeah, I'm sure they'll all be helpful. I'm sure every one of them will be well thought out.
Throw it on the Twitter there, Chris. We'll have a name by the end of the show.
We've tried alcoholics before. That didn't catch on.
Alcoholics Anonymous?
Yeah.
Alcoholics
not anonymous.
Obvious?
Yeah, I was going to say, it's pretty obvious. So, guys, we're here tonight, and one of the themes of tonight's show is just that there's obvious changes coming. Like, it's clear. I mean, it happens every offseason. But there's a bunch of things going on, as we stand in the precipice of what the offseason program is, that the Buffalo Bills are actively trying to change. Some of them there's things that are going to happen to them that are involuntary potentially. And I think it's interesting taking a look at all of the changing philosophies at play when you think about the changes that are coming down the pipe for the Bills, some of the changes that have already happened, and also the skew of some of these things when it means what can we expect the 2025 Buffalo Bills offseason and just philosophically this team to want to be moving forward. Now, I will say, Chris, Brian has come here with something to lead into the show, because I feel like with the Super Bowl being over, everyone feels like a sense of loss, right? Unless you're a junkie about the offseason. Everybody looks at it and goes, okay, I guess I'm waiting 6 months to see meaningful football again.
Yeah.
Great. Whereas people who are junkies about the offseason process will still come around. They'll still watch podcasts and listen to these things. And some people get really revved up about them, especially when there's significant talking points. One of them that I talked about in our show, kind of redoing the end of season pressers, is just how I was genuinely impressed with the amount of change that we saw from Sean McDermott from one year to the next. And the concept that, well, I get everyone still not being happy with the final result.
My favorite part of McDermott's press conference now was the part where he said that Matthew Smiley was coming back.
We are going to talk. We are going to talk about that.
Yeah.
So, but it was the concept that he changed. He did the thing. Everyone goes, oh, he's just the same old McDermott, same old McDermott. So he takes a season, and he's not the same old McDermott in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. And people go, I want it different, but not like that, you idiot. It's still bad. It's like, all right, well then what? So basically the mandate should have just been Super Bowl or nothing was going to satisfy me, because that's where a lot of people ended up. Like all of the protests and all of the I want different really just boiled down to, at the end of the year, if you don't win the Super Bowl, I still think you're a loser.
Just win.
Exactly.
Yep.
So with that in mind, you've come in here with some statistics and some talking points from your last appearance.
Yeah, so we talked about on the last time I was on, I think it was on the live that we did it, like what would be a successful outcome? I think, Chris, you were the one that asked that, right? What outcome would satisfy you that you wouldn't be calling for McDermott? So I want to ask you guys, based on the way that this season ended, do you view this season as a success?
I would say yes, because since the 13-second game, this is the best we've done against the Chiefs in a playoff format. But if you were going to go, all right, we got to get rid of McDermott, like your only option to replace him was going to be Mike McCarthy, who seems to be like the offensive Sean McDermott.
Yeah, so
same career trajectory. He's only got one Super Bowl. Probably could have had more, but that was probably something with Rodgers and McCarthy. But that would have been like your only option if you were going to can McDermott after that game. Is Mike McCarthy was your only option?
Well, I don't think. I mean, we talked about it on the show. There wasn't a reality where McDermott was going to go.
No,
right? I mean, because by all accounts, you can make the argument that this team overachieved, and I was the
Can
first
I say something too?
Yeah.
Here's what I love about our Twitter, and this is why I don't take social media seriously. Like nobody understands when the game is happening and I'm angry tweeting about something. If people go, well, your tweets are your thoughts and your permanent feelings. It's like, I don't think you know how much I drink. Yeah. I use the word ruminate. That's all you need to know about me drinking and sending text messages and tweets. You wake up and you change and you take a sober eye to things and you kind of figure out where you stand on them, which is what everybody does.
Yeah.
And yet at the same time, you're not allowed to do that on Twitter. People are like, oh, you're a bad fan. Yep. You got me. I'm the worst.
Yep.
I suck.
So you talk about McDermott changing, right? I think we gave him the right amount of credit before ahead of that Baltimore game, that he had, went for it when he was supposed to go for it. It seemed like he was using his timeouts a little better, even though, we still had things to question. But at the end of the day, it's still the same McDermott in crunch time, right? At the end of the day, you get to an AFC title game, you give up 32 points to the Kansas City Chiefs. Chris, do you know how many games it had been since the Kansas City Chiefs had scored 32 points?
God, I don't think that they've...
36 games. It had been 36 games since they had scored 32 points in a football game. September 24th, 2023, when they played the Bears. That was the last time that they had scored that many points. McDermott, defensive guy, right? Defensive guy. 32 points they gave up. Now let's run down the list. So we talk about McDermott changing. The last, and these stats are all courtesy of Ty Dunn. If you didn't read the article that Ty Dunn put out, it was another opportunity to get to the Super Bowl. The Bills let it slip through their fingers. Ty did a great article. Let's talk about the last 5 elimination games. So the last 5 elimination games that they've played, 4 of those have been against Mahomes. 1 of those have been against Joe Burrow. In non-kneel down drives, there have been 40 non-kneel down drives in those last 5 football games. The Buffalo Bills have allowed 22 touchdowns, 55% of those drives, 9 field goals, meaning that they've allowed scores on 77.5% of non-kneel down drives in the last 5 elimination games that they've played. Only forced 8 punts. They've allowed one. There was 1 missed field goal, so really that number might have been higher. They've only forced 2 turnovers in 5 elimination games, which this season that was their bread and butter, man. That they won football games because they turned the football over. 166 points they've allowed in the last 5 elimination games, which is 4.15 points in non-kneel down drives. So they're allowing more than a field goal. So the only common denominator over those last 5 games when it comes to the defense is Sean McDermott. It's not Leslie Frazier, not Bobby Babbitt,
sure,
not anybody. That's a Sean McDermott defense with Sean McDermott players that Brandon Beane went out and got him to run his defense.
Sure.
So did he change? Yes. Did he change where it mattered? No.
But when you talk about change isn't turning on a light switch. Change, as someone who's had to spend, look at me. At the age of 39, I'm about to be 40 years old and I'm married with 2 children who by all accounts are pretty happy. My wife hasn't stabbed me to death in my sleep yet, so I think I'm doing pretty well. Do you know the amount of change that's been required from the person I was when maybe even we first met to now that I've had to undergo over years and that I'm still constantly evolving to try to stay on top of that and to try to get to that point?
Yeah, but it's not in a positive motion.
Well, it never will. Here's the thing. It's never always forward, or it's never just, okay, I changed. I flip on a light switch, and guess what? All of a sudden, I'm not a guy who might drink too much and blast music doing knuckle push-ups shirtless in the basement until 3 o'clock in the morning. Like, that doesn't just go away. You have to slowly over time weed that guy out of your existence. I know from experience. Here's what I'm willing to say. And I think that this is a great jumping off point for the rest of the show. I'm happy because you not only saw what happened and the changes that transpired, but I also see the changes that we're going to talk about over the course of tonight's show. And some of the things that might signal that if he recognizes that philosophically we have to do something else, because I have been walking into a buzzsaw and I have been getting my teeth kicked in. I've been failing the people who have been put under my tutelage, right? Like, I think it's a huge component. And if we want to start about philosophical changes and where the team could be different heading forward, I think part of it's just the maturity of our coordinators and a recognition from our head coach that, hey, Babich is going to have his own ideas, and I need to help create the environment. He said as much, in his end of season presser and when he met with Ty Dunn and allowed Ty Dunn to do an interview in his office. Yep. He said, look, I've understood now going into this season that almost like the concept of servant leadership. Mm-hmm. I have to be whatever these people need me to be. Support them in whatever way. Like, let them tell me what they need from me and just do that. And I can be a more effective leader. And what you saw was a team that overachieved in a lot of ways because they were better organized. Were they the most organized? No. But they were better, and definitely better than you could expect with 2 rookie coordinators in the 2 most prominent coaching positions besides head coach. So when I see that, and I hear him talk about, okay, we're going to continue to build on some of the things. At the end of the season, he sits down and says, we did some things and we did some things differently, and there's statistics to back some of those different things they tried up. The question is, these things that you tried to do differently, did you build enough infrastructure to support that change? Or was it just change for the sake of change? Was it me telling my wife, don't worry, honey, I'm never going to drink too much ever again? That's a lie. You're never going to achieve that if that's what you're, but it could be, hey, I'm going to massage this set of circumstances and I'm going to change these specific things so that I can get to the place where I'd like to be. I think we saw some of that. And again, some of these hires and some of the changes that are coming, I think really speak to that. Now, before we get into the guys they brought in, I want to switch gears here for a second and talk about maybe a guy they're losing in Terrance Gray. Okay. Terrance Gray, director of player personnel. I think that this throws a wrench in a lot of the things that you're trying to do if it does happen.
Where did he go?
Well, he hasn't gone anywhere yet. But look at this, Chris. First of all, testament to Brandon Beane and just what he's built here. If you want to talk about our GM, how many GMs has Brandon Beane put into the NFL from his tree? You know how coaches have trees, Chris? GMs do too. How many people have left the Bills front office and taken GM jobs in the 8 years Beane has been here? Do you know?
First thing that's going to come to mind and with a lot of people is that we're not off to a good start if you're going to mention Joe Shane and the way Saquon left New York. Who was the dude that went to Houston and was there for 2 seconds and then came back?
Brian Gainey?
Brian Gaines.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So looking at those two, those are the only two that I can think of that went on to a more productive role.
There was one more when the whole Buffalo Panthers thing got started, when Dan Morgan went to the Panthers.
Oh, is he still there?
Yeah.
Okay. That would be the only move that is looked upon in a good light. So far, Joe Shane, you got to the playoffs in your first year. Congratulations, you haven't built anything.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter. You got guys promoted to jobs. If you're a head coach and guys from your tree keep getting hired, it doesn't matter whether, I mean, it matters to a certain degree whether they're winners or not, but the reality is you're getting guys in position to get jobs, which
Thank
means
God
you're
that
always going to
Matt
recruit
Patricia
talent.
stopped that for Belichick.
I was just saying, look at Belichick, right? Like he had Romeo Crennel and,
Patricia stopped all that.
Yeah, they were done after that.
So there's not many GMs, Chris, in NFL history that can say, hey, my tree features, and there's been some long time GMs, especially when you go back to like the 70s and the 80s. Not a lot of those guys can say that they produced 2 other NFL GMs from their collective talent pool as a front office. I mean, do you hit the nail on the head? One of them really sucks at his job. We watched that happen on Hard Knocks in front of everybody.
Not only that, his child is better than he is. Draft Jaden Daniels.
But the idea is that talented people continue to join the Bills front office, knowing that this is kind of a highway towards, hey, if I want to get a leg up, join the Bills front office staff and learn under Brandon Beane, because he seems to push the right buttons and he seems to know what he's doing.
Well, I think the question too is it talented people are joining the team, or is it that Brandon Beane's really good at making guys look talented?
So it could be the Bill Belichick effect. But the idea is Terrance Gray, currently our player personnel director, could go on to be the GM of the Jaguars here after he had, I believe, a second interview.
Yeah, second interview, I think, today.
Yes.
Yesterday or today.
And he could leave and be the 4th person to leave the franchise and go sit in the captain's chair somewhere else in the front office. And I think that it's a really big endorsement of the environment that we've cultivated here from a personnel and a directorial standpoint. Chris, in layman's terms, because I know you don't know what a director of player personnel does. I've made some notes for you, okay? You're basically in charge of every player on the roster or who you might anticipate will be on the roster. So that means
college or pro?
Well,
or college and pro.
And pro. Mm-hmm. So you're in charge of scouting free agents. You're in charge of you're overseeing the process of scouting draft picks. You keep a database full of profiles on every player who could potentially be an asset that's acquirable by your franchise. And then once you've acquired said players, you work with the team to develop training programs. You work with your staff and your individual position coaches to figure out what's a reasonable trajectory for this kid. How do we acclimate this free agent to our system? Like what? That's all under the umbrella of the director of player personnel, which makes that role makes you a good fit as a GM if you're good at it.
Sure. Because you got the player evaluation point, you've got the forecasting part of things. The only thing you really don't get too much involved in is the contract aspect of things. So.
No.
Hey, as a lay fan in this for Terrance Gray, if he's going to Jacksonville, my only question would be, what's his? I'm gonna have to do my best impression here. What's his relationship with Duval? Has he worked with Liam Cohen before? Do they have a past experience together?
No, but I think that coach is being allowed to be part of the interview process.
Well, just the fact that Trent Baalke was fired indicates that the coach didn't want to work with Trent Baalke. So I don't know if there's a relationship necessarily with Gray, but there was a non-relationship with Trent Baalke. And because keep in mind, right, like Baalke was going to be retained. It was very much a Matthew Smiley situation, right? Like they maintained that Baalke was going to be part of the team.
Until people started saying no.
And then all of a sudden they were like, oh, people don't want to come coach here because of the GM. I guess we'll fire him. But by then they were too late in the cycle to get any of their first choices for coach. So they hired Cohen.
So, Chris, just to give you some background on Gray and what he's accomplished here so he came in 2017 as the college scouting director, played a pretty significant role in the identification of talents like Josh Allen, Tremaine Edmonds, Spencer Brown, Gabe Davis.
Yeah, it's worth noting that he was a carryover. Like he came in. Was he here before Bean, or did he? I think he was a carryover from Bean, right?
And he
from
was allowed
Whaley's
to
staff.
stay. Not many guys were.
Yeah.
And they said, "Look, we like what you do. Everybody else can kick rocks. We like you. So let's try this out." And I from that perspective, you can nitpick the draft misses, but the draft is filled with misses.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, too, when you talk about a director of player personnel, he's not the one pulling the trigger, right? All he's doing is aggregating the data, presenting the information to the GM to help them make the decision. Bean's the one making the picks.
So the fact that you were able to get enough information to feel good when you're Doug Whaley doing what you didn't know was your last draft, and you say, hey, I'm going to go out and I like a Deion Dawkins, and I like a Matt Milano, and I like a
Taron Johnson.
I like a Taron Johnson. Yep. I like a
Tremaine Edmonds,
he took a football to the head in a combine drill.
Yeah.
Yes.
Tremaine Edmonds, even though he wound up, going to Chicago, but you can argue right now his best years were in Buffalo so far.
He got promoted to director of player personnel in 2022. Overseeing all player activity and development and external scouting. And over that span, the Bills have actively been able to ID and recruit a lot of successful free agents who didn't come with a giant price tag. You think about Daquan Jones, David Edwards, Mac Hollins, Dwayne Smoot. Like, he went out and found guys who said, listen,
Well, I mean, and the other thing, I mean, you look at like David Edwards, right? Like that was essentially a reclamation project, right? David Edwards, he had been written off by most teams that he was just kind of a swing guy. He was never going to be a starter again, and
he won a Super Bowl, and that's nice.
Yeah,
and it was your second attempt at Roger Saffold.
Yeah, and not only did he identify that Edwards was a guy that came in, he probably had a say in indicating that Edwards was the guy that was ready to take over for Morse.
Yeah. And so it's just this idea that if he leaves, you have to question whether that now becomes more difficult for this franchise. When you have somebody who's been as tenured as he's been and also has had the successes that he's had, that's going to alter our approach one way or the other. Whether it's good or bad, things will change.
I think I'm much more comfortable in Bean's ability to replace below him than I am in McDermott's ability to place below.
Well, and also him. I think that what Terrance decides, obviously if you're offered a GM job, you're not going to say no.
Sure, there's only 32 of them.
But I think I think that what could push you in a certain direction is also knowing what your GM plans to do with all of your hard work. Mm-hmm. Right? Like, so Chris, if I told you, hey, guess what, Chris, your job is to go out and collect as much information about prospects as possible. Go scout all the college kids. And then you show up with your giant book of all the college scouting you've done, and I go, it doesn't fucking matter. I traded away our first, second, and third round pick to go get another guy. And oh, by the way, I spent in the process of that, had to dole out a massive contract to the player we traded for. So there's no money to spend in the salary cap either. So all the free agency stuff you did is mostly useless.
Take out the first 120 pages of players that you just handed to me, right? Because I can't afford any of them.
It almost reminds me of the movie Draft Day. Yep. When what's his face?
Kevin
my
Costner.
God. No. When the comedian? I don't know why I'm spacing.
Dennis Leary.
Dennis Leary walks into Kevin Costner's office with the playbook and just sets it on fire.
Lights it on fire. Yeah.
And he's like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
What are you doing to me?
Well, I think the other thing too to keep in mind is we've seen it a lot more recently with guys that are willing to stick in a good position and say, you know what, I'm going to be a top name next cycle. So I'm going to hang here. I'm not going to settle for, yes, it's one of 32 jobs. I'm not going to Jacksonville because I don't like their organization. I don't like the quarterback. I don't like the picks that they've got this year. I'm going to wait a Ben Johnson, right? Like I'm gonna wait.
Joe Brady withdrawing his name from the Saints.
Like I'm gonna wait Mike McCarthy, right? Like Mike McCarthy was like, I'm not going to New Orleans. I'm gonna hang and I'm gonna wait for the next cycle to roll around. Like these jobs will come open again, and it's interesting to me to see that these guys are willing to now wait, because in the past, if you said no to one team, there was a very real chance that you'd never get another shot, right?
So then there's a part of me, and maybe this is just me reading too much into it, but there's a part of me that wonders if this guy who's been a kind of a mainstay in this front office is all of a sudden like, hey, the franchise seems to be peaking right now, but I want to get off the bus. Mm-hmm. Maybe there is an acknowledgement that, hey, I'm getting older. This job might not open up again, but also the Bills might be going to roll thunder with their assets, and I'm not going to have much to do.
Right.
I don't have a role. So then if that's the case, that would be the perfect time to get off the bus.
Yeah, but I think it depends on where you're going.
100%.
Do you want to go to Jacksonville where you're tethered to a Trevor Lawrence who looks like he's probably not going to work out, right? Like you're inheriting a quarterback that you have to play, because you're not going to go in there and say, we're going to get rid of Trevor. Like that ain't happening. So then, and you know, you look at the skill position guys, they're not great. Like ETN often hurt. They don't have a ton of talent on defense.
I love the amount of money they spent at wide receiver just for that result.
Yeah, I mean, they paid Gabe Davis what? Like Gabe Davis is making like $18.5 million a year. Like what guy wants to take the GM job and he's got to worry about that on his roster?
A guy who's willing to interview twice.
Sure. So I wouldn't. If I'm Gray, I don't take the job just for what you laid out. Just wait till the next cycle, because the moment that dude went to a mic and just went Duval, his career was over.
Yeah, I mean,
I'll drink a Seagram's that he doesn't make it to his fourth season.
Put it on the board. I will take that Seagram's bet. There we go.
Yeah, because I mean,
I think ones in 2025.
I think you also look at like what could potentially open up next cycle too, right? Like you've got guys like, is an Andy Reid ready to go pretty soon here, and now he's going to cede roster control. Is John Harbaugh ready to potentially go, or is forced out in Baltimore and he's going to cede control? They have a GM obviously, but if he goes, maybe the GM's like, well, I don't want to be here and do this. Mike Tomlin has a lot of control over the roster. Maybe he's like, there's a lot of Kyle Shanahan is another one. Like maybe he goes and now he's going to cede control of the roster, and that GM may not want to stick around. So I think
Dallas isn't going to be around much longer, because I believe that Jerry Jones is playing up the sweepstakes for Arch Manning. So I think Brian Schottenheimer is just a coach, and he just needs a coach for 2 years.
He's their Curtis Painter.
Yeah.
He's the guy that they bring in to make sure they get to the next Andrew Luck.
Yeah, because then he can fire him after 1 year and say, hey, I've got the number one pick and it's going to be Arch Manning. Who wants to come coach Arch Manning? Right.
So with this in mind, like it's interesting to watch what happens to the Bills on that front. But I do think that the most impactful, right, has to be the two defensive acquisitions. Mm-hmm. It starts with Ryan Nielsen.
See, I would say, is that a shot over the head of Bobby Babich? Like you're on watch, because he's a
Babich.
He's a defensive coordinator for was it Jacksonville and Atlanta the last 2 years?
Yeah, and did you watch what teams did to those teams? I think there's an acknowledgement, Chris, that I think you have to dig deeper for that, right?
Well, you've got to fill the coffers, right? Because Bobby Babich and both your coordinators are not going to be here for long.
Well, no, I mean,
like a franchise Chris, like the Buffalo Bills.
Chris, both coordinators got coaching interviews. Have already, throughout this just kind of easy portion of the career where they're still brand new, have already gone and taken interviews. For Joe Brady, this is his second time through the cycle. But Babich got looks last year. Mm-hmm. This year he didn't, and we're kind of lucky for that. But with that said, if he has another up year, it's not to say that some team won't come knocking looking for another DeMeco Ryans, like, hey, I need a young, energetic guy to come in here and reinvigorate my franchise. But with that said, I'm not looking at defensive coordinator when I think about Ryan Nielsen. In fact, I think that the two of them he might be here to work with him, and I'll explain why. His background as a defensive line coach is what interests me the most about the hire. You go back, Eric Washington served as the Bills D-line coach from 2020 to 2023. And over the course of that time, we drafted and kind of hoped to develop a whole bunch of defensive linemen. That's your A.J. Epinesa, it's Brian Cox, it's Greg Rousseau, Boogie Basham, right? Justin Zimmer, Harrison Phillips, Ed Oliver. There's not a single Pro Bowl appearance among any of those players. Not one. And I guess did Rousseau fill in as like an alternate?
Yeah, I think he was an alternate last year.
There's no first ballot, you're a Pro Bowler.
There's no incentive earning Pro Bowlers.
No, not among that entire group.
Right.
And at the same time, Von Miller, outside of him being healthy, he hasn't been all that useful. In 2024, they fired Eric Washington and they promote, guy's name is Marcus West. He gets the bump this year. Okay. There was no new faces, and I think that's important, right? Continuity within the system, defensive linemen who understand their assignments and what this system's going to be, with maybe a few philosophical tweaks here and there from Babbage.
Yeah, the only new name was, there was Dwayne Carter and Smoot were the two new names.
I mean, but
they were role players,
and we went bargain shopping
Solomon?
for backups.
Solomon, but yeah, he was inactive for a lot of games, and yeah.
Everybody who was considered a starter has at least 2 seasons of familiarity with the scheme. So you would think that there would be a sizable uptick in the consistency and productivity of that
That's
unit.
the hope, right? Yeah.
And it didn't materialize.
No.
Now, were they slouches? Absolutely not. They were streaky, and that sucked. I mean, but you look at the numbers on the whole, it led the NFL in fumbles forced by a defensive line with 11. Finished 13th in pressures by the defensive line and 11th in sacks. 8th in the NFL in tackles by defensive line. So it's like you're not outside the realm of what a good D-line is. You just aren't making short of the forced fumbles, which is a static thing to begin with. You're not forcing a lot of the impact plays that really make a difference down the stretch. So
you're not doing a great job of getting pressure with 4.
No. Yeah. And there again, you go into the biggest game of the season and your defensive line is once again the weakest unit on your entire roster. They find a way to just absolutely victimize you in this way. And in a game that's separated by 3 points, like you're 1 yard short and 3 points of going to the Super Bowl.
And you're a Samaje Perine 12-yard gain away from giving your quarterback the ball back with 1:56 and 2 timeouts.
And it's just so frustrating when you watch the performance of the line. To me, Chris, I feel like this defensive line has become a lot like the offensive line used to be. Right? Like you've got some pieces that you think you can trust in what they do. You know, your Spencer Browns, your Deion Dawkins. You know, I look at that and I go, okay, pretty reliable. I've got a Rousseau. You know, he's kind of the equivalent of a Connor McGovern or a Spencer Brown. He's not a star. He's not on Dawkins level, but he's reliable. I would rather have him than not have him, right? You go on down and you find guys like Daquan Jones and Von Miller, who to me equate a lot like Mitch Morse, where you go, this guy's long in the tooth, and for what I'm paying, I could probably get better.
Right.
So they're upgradable if you can find the right fit. It's not bereft of talent, but at the same time, there's nothing here that tells me on its face it's gonna get better. And there's what's worse is that there's not a whole lot of guys who can quote unquote grow into a bigger role. Look, who on this defensive line do you expect to take a giant developmental step forward next year?
I think you could see Carter take a step.
Sure.
Yeah.
Who else?
Yeah.
You've got one player who you can look at.
Maybe Solomon. I mean, maybe Solomon, give him another year, let him put some weight on.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Well, if you're comparing how our offensive line came around to the defensive line, I mean, I think our offensive line got better with the hire of Aaron Cromer. So if we're doing something in the way of a new defensive line coach, that gives me hope that there's brighter horizon for our defensive line.
Well, and so let me help you feel better about that then, if that's where you're looking, right? Because this is a team that, as we talked about at over the last few weeks, has historically used its assets, and their current roster construction, it's like they put the emphasis on their smaller coverage players than they do in the trenches. And I think everything that you know about football tells you that's a mistake. So with that in mind, you watch a team that played 11% more man than they had in the regular season once the postseason started, and you watched them just get embarrassed again by an unperforming defensive line. Then you enter Ryan Nielsen as a senior defensive assistant and former D-line coach, and Mike Pellegrino of the Patriots as a defensive backs coach. And I think here is where you start to get into, wow, this is another evolution of what McDermott has probably learned, and he's aiming for. Chris, this guy, first of all, I know why he probably appeals to McDermott. He fucking loves player rotation.
Yeah.
He loves it to a point that Eric Armstead got pissed off at him and publicly trashed him at the end of the season because he took Eric Armstead out of like the middle of the defensive line and made him a D end.
Yeah.
You know, Eric Armstead, for all that money he was making, only started 2 games.
Yeah, that was a bad signing for them.
Well, also, it was poor usage of the player. Chris, you want to talk about why I don't think he's threatening for Babbich's job right now? Nobody's mismanaged a defense worse than he did. He ended up having to bench Ron Darby and Eric Armstead after they publicly talked shit about his decision-making on how he deploys his players. Although Ron Darby, I mean, what's he now?
Nothing. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I think Nielsen brings is from what I've read at least is he brings some really interesting like blitz situations, a lot of like really exotic blitz looks, and a lot of misdirection on the defense, which we know McDermott likes to do.
But
right,
also
and to your point, maybe
Babbage.
that's someplace where Babbage has he struggled there, or has he not been able to in the moment manage it as well as maybe McDermott would like him to. So let's go get him some help.
There's also this idea, Chris, that kind of like succession planning. Like, hey, we have a Ken Dorsey who's going to step into the role of Brian Dable after
Can
he
you
leaves.
believe Ken Dorsey's still getting jobs?
No.
Like, what is going on? He just who's bringing him in? The Cowboys want to bring him in.
Cowboys, the Cowboys have Brian Schottenheimer, Ken Dorsey, and Matt Eberflus.
Yeah, but
There you
I
go.
don't. But
It's
but
like
I didn't
the
even.
opposite of the Expendables, where all they're doing is putting together a group of guys who can, like, you are destined to suck.
The worst part, though, is like when I read the article about Dorsey, it was they want to bring in Dorsey and define a role for him. Like, what is that? Like, they're not even going to make him offensive coordinator? How do you define a role for a guy like Ken Dorsey?
From what I last read, he got pass game coordinator.
So this brings up the point.
Yeah.
So you had a Ken Dorsey in the pipeline
Like a
when
pass
you're
game coordinator doesn't throw screens, right?
when you lost your coordinator, it was okay because you had a Ken Dorsey to turn to. And then when you lost him, it was okay because you had already hired a quarterbacks coach and then a passing game coordinator named Joe Brady. And Joe Brady,
who had called offenses before.
Who had
That's
called
the big
offenses
difference, yeah.
before. So now here you have a defensive room, and you're saying, hey, I've got a D coordinator and I've got a defensive line coach who just replaced a guy we had to fire for lack of performance. Well, we're still not seeing the performance we like. Let's get a guy and get him in the building. And he can get in the ear of our defensive coordinator. He's got some great ideas. He can teach him about some blitz scheme and things like that because he's a young coordinator. He probably could use some tutelage. At the same time, also, hey, Marcus West, pick it up because I've got a guy waiting in the wings who's done your job. And not only done it, but done it well. Chris, I want to go over this with you. 2017 to 2020, he's the defensive line coach for the New Orleans Saints. Over those 3 seasons, they were top 3 in the NFL in terms of pressures and sacks generated by the defensive line. Do you know who he developed?
Trey Hendrickson.
Not just Trey Hendrickson, and I think it's important to note Trey Hendrickson is a 3rd-round pick.
Yeah.
Not first-round pick, probably going to be a stud because of his physical traits
Bosa,
anyway.
right?
Not Joey Bosa.
Yeah.
Trey Hendrickson, who went on to be a star for the Cincinnati Bengals. Also, Sheldon Rankins and David Onyemata, who have gone on to be, I mean, Rankins is kind of a journeyman, but he's still getting work.
Yeah.
Onyemata, he's a household name for the Saints. Like, he has been an impactful defensive tackle.
He just got a big contract, right? Didn't they just re-sign him in last offseason?
I don't know. Chris, you want to fact check that? Did Onyemata get a David Oneymata? Did he get a contract extension? But either way, he grew these guys as like middling round draft picks into significantly impactful players for the franchise. Something that we have not been able to do.
There you go. March 16th, 2023, Onyemata signed a 3-year, $35 million contract with the Falcons.
It's not bad for a defensive tackle.
And his Wikipedia says reuniting him with Ryan Nielsen.
So you're bringing a guy with that kind of a background to a team that has a sophomore defensive tackle in Dwayne Carter who flashed some real potential.
He did. He really did. I mean, if he hadn't have been hurt throughout the season, he struggled with injuries. Carter, you could have argued, might have been the rookie of the year for the Bills, the way he was pacing. He played really well.
You've got an NFL draft that, by all accounts, is overflowing with interior defensive line talent. Okay. You've got young-ish defensive ends like Greg Rousseau and Javon Solomon and guys who you can still come in and mentor and try to help grow. Like
Epinesa, who may have played himself into coming back to Buffalo. Right?
I think A.J. Epinesa has played himself directly into the middle of Delaware Avenue. I hope the next time I see that guy's name in the paper, they're going to be like, it's the craziest thing, Buffalo Bill, clipped by a Greyhound. It's nuts. I've had enough. And then there's also, like I said, the idea of what does senior defensive assistant mean? But either way, Chris, we talked about needing an Aaron Kromer on the defense. This sounds like the type of guy who could be that if Marcus West doesn't seem up to the task.
Is this another opportunity? Is this a signaling? You said, we talk about Sean McDermott, who took a step in some areas last year. Is this maybe a signaling that he's ready to take another step back from the defense and give Babich more reign, saying, I've got a guy that I know can help you in the areas maybe I was helping you with this year. I really need to focus on these other things and continuing to shore up what I need to improve as a head coach. And this is me, the conductor of the Sean McDermott hater train. Is this, maybe I'm giving him too much credit, but is this an opportunity for him to say, I'm going to take another step back? I understand what's going on, and I'm the common denominator, so I'm going to add another layer between myself and Bobby Babich.
And
this is a step back. When you say step back, because you got Ryan Neal, is this mean so McDermott can focus on
being a head coach?
Well, being a head coach and clock management and when to fucking challenge. Is John Perry still here? Can we get that fucking guy out of the building?
Or maybe give him the opportunity to focus a little bit more and say, hey, Joe, why is the last time that James Cook, my second best offensive player, why hasn't he touched the ball since 13 minutes left in the fourth quarter? Right? Like maybe there's an opportunity.
Injured.
Right. Maybe there's an opportunity.
Allegedly.
So if he takes another step back, and what I mean, not from a developmental standpoint, but just more so from a hands-on standpoint, he can take another step back and he can focus on some of those things
100%.
And call his coordinators out when they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing.
And the Nielsen hire on itself, in and of itself, kind of signals, hey, one, philosophy change, and how do I, Sean McDermott, want to run this football team? Two, it also underscores a recognition that there needs to be better development taking places in the trenches. Yeah. You bring in that guy and you make him the assistant defensive line coach and also senior. You're paving the way to say, look, as soon as Marcus West shows us his ass, we can just promote you and you have that job.
Or gives Marcus West, or gives you an opportunity to let Marcus West focus on other stuff that's not development and more so scheme and fit and rotation and
like packing his bags.
Yeah.
So in tandem with that, you think about the really aggressive defensive schemes. When they call him a senior defensive assistant, it gives you, when I've looked up other guys who have held that title, basically what they are is they are the like the Sultan and Jafar and Aladdin.
Yeah.
He's going to end up being Bobby Babich's Jafar for the year.
Yeah.
When you look at other guys who've held that position, that's what they do. They're there as mentors. They're there as like, hey, I have a lot of experience in this. I just haven't been able to apply it well lately.
Or maybe if Babich is up in the booth again, maybe he needs a guy on the field that these players are going to respect. Or
it's about filling in gaps,
right? Or that will get in someone's face, like a Von Miller, and say, hey, where you at? Right? Like, where you at here? We need it. We need a play.
Why is there a triangle on the back of your head?
Right.
So with that in mind, I found it really interesting knowing the aggressive nature of Ryan Nielsen and all of the defenses he's called, whether they've been successful or not.
Right. They've always been aggressive, right, wrong, or indifferent. He's an aggressive coach.
Is the fact that they bring in defensive backs coach Mike Pellegrino to take over our cornerbacks coach job.
Who guys they've raved about Pellegrino.
Raving about this guy doesn't do it justice. I mean, in 6 years with the Patriots as the cornerbacks coach, well, he's been with the team for 10 years.
Yep.
But in 6 as cornerbacks coach.
And he's only what? 32?
He's
31,
young.
32? Like think about that, right? He's been with Bill Belichick.
Do you know what it takes to get a
10
job from
years.
Bill Belichick if you don't know your shit?
Well, if,
31.
or if you're not his kid.
He's 31.
Yeah, or if you don't know his kid. I mean, that kid just looks like Joe Dirt. I'll never not be able to see, especially with his tongue out when the camera.
He's coaching at North Carolina now, right?
It's so
Isn't he with his
funny.
dad now?
Powder blue, just somebody. He's doing the Michael Jordan tongue thing, except you're not playing the game.
Yeah.
Well, get this. Pellegrino played lacrosse.
Oh, she's a McDermott guy.
I was just saying,
all
I'm
day.
surprised he's not a wrestler.
He was absolutely a wrestler. in high school.
So, as he oversaw the development of their cornerbacks and kind of the
Oh, he's
organization.
a former professional lacrosse player.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Passing yards per game allowed by the Patriots over that time span. Second, they ranked 6th. They ranked 2nd. They ranked 18th, 10th, and 6th again. You look at the talents that he's been able to cultivate. He gets Stephon Gilmore. Turns him to the AP Defensive Player of the Year in 2019. All-Pro vote for J.C. Jackson in 2021. All-Pro vote for Christian Gonzalez. Now, some of that is, hey, you drafted the right talents. But also, you don't become an All-Pro without coaching.
Yeah.
And I like the fact that this guy gets brought in right after Vrabel releases him because Vrabel doesn't know that guy. This guy was a Belichick guy, holdover when Mayo took the job, and now you've got a new guy who wants to go get someone he's familiar with.
Right, because Vrabel had been gone for a while from that organization. So and he knew Mayo, right? Like, because Mayo was defensive coordinator before he stepped into the head coach role. So it makes sense that there's a holdover there, and now Vrabel wants to clean house and bring his own guys. But, but he's done a really good job. They did a lot of rotation at that corner position and at that safety position. I mean, look at Christian Gonzalez, right? Like, he's arguably the best corner that came out of that class. And a lot of folks didn't think that was going to be the case when he got drafted.
The thing we've talked about a lot over the last few weeks here on this podcast is the idea that your philosophy in terms of defensive structure and just how you allocate your assets is probably going to have to change if you want to win a Super Bowl. It's going to have to. The example I give, Milano, Bernard, and Teron Johnson are all, there's 3 of your most highly paid players, and every single one of them is an undersized pursuit style defensive player.
Yeah.
At some point, that's not going to cut it. Those guys aren't going to cut it when you compare them up to and I know it's a recency bias, but let's say the Eagles defense.
Sure.
There is a stark contrast between our two teams. Mm-hmm. Where we've put our assets and where they've put theirs are night and day.
Yeah.
And you see the outcome of that. Now, does that mean you're a perfect team? No, it probably, having a different philosophy might cost you a game or two, right? But when it matters and you get the right game plan and you really crank up the heat on a team, you have that second gear that you really struggle to manufacture when you're built the way that the Bills are. When you're smaller off-ball players and are where your assets are being spent, it is harder to generate meaningful pressure and be disruptive when it comes to the front of the line without pulling extra bodies to contribute. And this is a thing that was interesting because I think we've already ID'd, right? They're never going to go away from the Matt Milanos and the Terrell Bernards and the Dorian Williamses of the world.
Right.
They ran an experiment with a Matt Milano and a Tremaine Edmonds. And at the end of the day, they had to pick one. And they picked Matt Milano, and I don't think it's wrong.
Yeah.
Now they've made it their identity across the middle of the defense. And that's okay. Mm-hmm. You can do that. But now you got to be able to protect those guys.
Yep.
If this is the type of player, never mind the name on the back of the jersey, if you want that style of player, you have to be able to protect them with a robust defensive line. And we've done a bad job as a franchise of providing that. Teams who like the Chiefs want to attack you with rub routes, right? Natural picks that happen down the field and just other things. Those smaller players struggle with that because, again, you're built for pursuit and you're built for coverage. You're not built for the contact that comes along with that. It's why guys like Mac Hollins go out there and create havoc.
Yeah.
When he's blatantly cheating in that Chiefs game.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he just puts his hands up like, what? It's like, dude, that doesn't make you innocent. Just saying, I didn't do it. This is where man defense, specifically man match coverage,
Right.
comes into play. And it's something that Pellegrino coaches a lot of that the Bills have not run much of at all under Sean McDermott. Could become a huge boon to the defense. It's like standard man coverage, but it gives you flexibility in that you can still identify and pick, like, after the snap. You can still change your assignment can still change, but you're still playing man coverage.
Sure.
And everyone goes, well, we're a zone team and that's not a thing and blah, 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 blah. Here's a fun fact for everybody. Chris, do you know that the Bills ran man coverage on 50% of their Patrick Mahomes' passing plays?
Didn't know that.
Yeah. They tried to become the ultimate man defense team. And it blew up in their faces again. Like, I'm so sick and tired of the Kyle Elam crowd going, well, he's a man corner in his own scheme. They gave him man coverage. They asked him to do it, and he literally fell on the ground or was so far off coverage. It's like they said, hey, play man off coverage. And then afterwards, they grabbed him by the face mask and said, we didn't say take the play off. We didn't say stand 10 yards downfield. Ass. The kid doesn't get it.
Yeah.
But within that, the fact that even with the injury, they said, hey, we're going to spend half the game trying to play this style of defense that doesn't suit us. That's a recognition by the coaching staff and by your defensive coordinator that we have to do something different.
Right.
This zone style that we like to play, the cover 2, cover 3 style defense, maybe with a robber, if we can get opportunistic, it's not working. We're getting worked out here. What can we do? Fine, fuck it. We're just going to go full send, let's play man. And then you find out, oh, shit, my personnel does really not know how to do this.
Yeah. I mean, I think the other thing that these hirings could signal is that they realize more so now than ever that they are going to have to be really tight on developing young talent to step in as soon as possible, right? Like you look at Cole Bishop and how long it took him to step into that role. They don't have the luxury of letting rookies develop anymore.
No.
Right? They need impact from these guys as soon as they join the roster. And maybe that's where these two new names on the defensive side, maybe that's where they're stepping in from a player development standpoint.
And that was the thing I was going to say is that if you're thinking about how the team might build the roster, it's this concept of everybody wants to see the big swing. The problem is the big swing that you might make this offseason, and I'm not saying they won't, but it doesn't immediately make you a Super Bowl winner.
Right.
It helps. It sure as hell helps. You bring me a Trey Hendrickson or you bring me a Max Crosby. You are a much better football team.
Sure.
Doing nothing else. You are a much better football team than you were when you ended the season this year. Now, you're going to need DBs. Mm-hmm. You're going to need to change, and especially if you want to get to play a little bit more of this aggressive style of defense. You're probably going to have to swap some bodies out.
Right.
You're probably going to have to bring some coaches in and audit what you have in the cupboard and say, hey, does Jamarcus Ingram actually have a place here? If we let him go out here with his size and his physicality, if we let him come out here, can he be a dime backer for us? Yeah. What's Cam Lewis's role? Is Cam Lewis being groomed as a stopgap option for Terron Johnson while we figure out or maybe he is the option?
Do you finalize his move to safety? And,
this is you have things that you have to underscore and to know that you got to figure out what do we want to be philosophically. And I think that you're going to see a shift towards larger, more physical defensive backs. You saw it start over the last 2 seasons, actually, when they went away from guys like Dane Jackson. Mm-hmm. They got away from Trey White.
Yep.
And instead they went with Christian Benford, who's not an athlete, but he's a physical. For a zone cornerback, he plays really physically.
Yeah.
And that's why he's one of the best in football.
And they've got another guy that plays a lot like that in Jamarcus Ingram, who maybe didn't come along as well as they wanted last year. Who was then thrust into a position where it was him or Kyle Elam against the Chiefs, and they went with Kyle Elam instead. So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot to be said for the defensive personnel, the stats that I talked about at the beginning of the show. The defensive personnel really exposed that defense in that game against the Chiefs. As soon as Christian Benford went down, that defense could not make an adjustment.
The shine came right off it, and they didn't have a pivot. And they're from a coaching perspective, they said, fine, let's run a system we haven't run at all this season.
And we'll put the kid out there that we drafted because he's a really good man corner.
And it still got you killed.
It still got you killed.
So,
and I mean, and again, not to belittle the McDermott point, but maybe there's an opportunity for him if he takes a step back to say, hey, can we get away from Elam? Can we get him off the field? Like, it's not working, Bobby. It's not working, right? Like, it's not working.
When he's in it trying to be defensive coordinator's assistant and then goes, fuck,
Yeah.
Elam did what? Because he's like, oh, I'm over here. I'm looking at the tablet. I'm talking to my coach, and the ball got snapped, and I'm trying to watch it.
So maybe he could use somebody in Babbich's ear, like a Nielsen, to say, Bobby, it's not working. or just pull Elam off the field and put somebody else out there, and he's empowered to do that.
Or to be on the field with these guys.
Right.
Being Babbich's mouthpiece down there on the sideline while he's on the headset.
So you wonder what that communication sounded like.
Exactly. Yeah. And so I just think that there's a lot of really interesting things, but it's clear there's a change in philosophy coming for the way that they've built this thing on defense, the way they're going to play call on defense. It's all of these pieces are lining up and signaling that this change is coming. I find that highly interesting. And then as we close the show, there was nothing more interesting this week than the Matthew Smiley thing.
Oof.
Like, Chris, we did it. We listened to it together. You played the audio for our audience of him coming out and going, nope, we believe in Matthew for 2025. He's got our full confidence. Right up until he didn't. And it came like 4 days after you said it.
Yeah.
Now, when you think about why, you and I have talked about this a little bit offline, and just the concept that maybe there's a handful of reasons why this played out the way that it did, right?
Yeah, I think to start, I think however this played out, the way it played out is not a great look for Sean McDermott.
It's not, but also you got to factor in he hasn't done when he's saying these things publicly, he hasn't done his exit interviews with his coaches yet. Right. He's done the exit interviews with the players, and now he's going to kind of dress his staff down at the end of the season and go, okay, where are we? What did we see? What did we like? What did we didn't like? What are your plans? Here's what I saw. Here's my constructive criticism. What are you going to do with that information? Or what thoughts do you have about how we fix it? You've managed. Yeah. So when you take a person and you say, hey, all right, so here's my critique of your job. But first, it always starts with a self-assessment. How do you think you did?
Yeah.
And then you go, okay, well, this is how you think you fared. This is how I see it. And this is what the numbers tell me. Now, here's the pieces of this that I don't like. What are we going to do? What's your thought as we sit here and talk about it? You don't have to have an answer right now, but give me a generalization of what we can do differently. How do we fix the fact that we are one of the worst coverage units in the entire NFL?
Yep.
I bet when they did the exit interview, Matthew Smiley got the briefing for his interview that it was going to happen on this day at this time, morning of. Like some people I know.
Listen, me scheduling interviews for this podcast, it's the Wild West, Chris, and it's what gives us our.
We're going to do the exit interview this day.
It's part of our
I'm not going
chart.
to tell you what time
or where.
Yeah, I'm not even going to give you the Zoom link.
He goes, you're going to get a text message 20 minutes ahead of time that says, meet me in the atrium of the field house. 20 minutes. No, so it's the concept of you sit down with this guy and you start listening to his thoughts and you start hearing things from his perspective. And then maybe your attitude changes and you go, I vouched for you because I believe in you. But what I'm hearing and what I'm seeing, I don't believe in that.
Yeah.
When I say, hey, what happened with your coverage units? And you go, well, I just need better coverage players. And I go, I don't know if you know, but I spend a lot of our team's assets on those coverage players. Yeah. There's a Reggie Gilliam here who doesn't need to be here.
Yeah.
I've got how many other players? A Tyler Matakevich has been here for a while, bud.
Yeah.
Wasn't any better with him. What are we doing?
I brought in a guy who wound up being my number one receiver, but he was really brought in to be a coverage guy and was pretty good at it. I got Cam Lewis, who's pretty good at tackling, arguably one of the better open field tacklers in the NFL. I mean, I think there might be some teeth to that where, okay, let's do your end of year review. How do you think you did? Here's how I think you did. How are we going to fix it? And then I'm not hearing you take the appropriate amount of ownership of what happened, which would be funny from McDermott.
Yeah, I know,
the stories we've heard. It would be funny for McDermott to say, I don't think you're owning this enough. But the other thing would be if, whether there was a defiance from Smiley that I don't need to fix anything.
What if he just showed up with a cheeseburger?
Yeah.
He showed up with a burger and laid it out on McDermott's desk. You mind? And then just starts eating. He's like, well, that's a move.
Yeah,
that's certainly a move.
Yeah, like the Office when the guy comes in, Will Arnett comes in. Oh no, it's Ray Romano comes in and he starts eating a sandwich, mid-interview, and he's just like, I didn't get a chance to eat lunch. I'm not supposed to eat lunch. I brought a peanut butter sandwich. But yeah, I mean, I could certainly see a situation where McDermott goes out, he vouches for Smiley, and he does the exit interview and says, not a fan of what you're thinking. Can we collaborate on this? And there's either a defiance or McDermott feels like he's just not hearing me. It's time to make a move.
Now, there's one other scenario, and I almost don't want to try to speak it into existence. There does exist a world where you sat down with the guy and you said, hey, what do you plan on doing differently? Hey, how about the inconsistency in our kicking game? Like, what are you doing to try to help Tyler Bass? And you don't like his answer to that. Or you as a team don't care to ask that question because you've already made the decision that, as I've outlined, you have a kicker who's counting $4 million towards your salary cap.
Yeah.
And there is an out in his contract this offseason.
Yeah.
And maybe you as a franchise have decided, you know what? We already know what we're going to do with this as soon as we get the opportunity to. We're going to gauge the market. We're not going to be crazy about this. We'll gauge the market and see who we can get. But if ahead of free agency, it sounds like there's a couple guys out there who we might be able to land. Maybe we go and we save ourselves some cap space and we let Mr. Tyler Bass go find work elsewhere. And if we're going to do that, we also brought in Jake Camarda, who was actually drafted ahead of Matt Araiza in the draft the year that Matt Araiza was drafted. And they say, look, here's another guy who maybe just needs a little bit better coaching, and he could become, I think the Ravens drafted him.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they have an incumbent punter, I feel like. I feel like they have a punter who's been there for a year or two.
I think so. Yeah.
So Camarda couldn't beat that guy out for a job, but that doesn't mean he's bad. And maybe they look at it and say, look, we've already decided that if we're getting rid of the kicker, we get rid of the holder, who's an average at best punter anyway. We've got another guy with upside, and we can always go find a journeyman punter. We can always go find a journeyman kicker for a year until we figure out the next guy we're going to draft.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, because Bass, you've got I think it's 1.6 if they just cut him.
Yep.
Savings against the cap. If they wait until after June 1st, it's 3.6.
Yeah.
Savings.
And
so,
kickers.
I mean, you could
the kicking market's never really robust.
You could feasibly get a kicker, punter, and if you need to sign back Reed Ferguson or go get another long snapper for $3.6 million. Right?
And that was the other side of this, is that the cap machinations being what they are, maybe they've decided that, hey, we've got a tenured long snapper, but if we're wholesale changing, maybe it's time.
Yeah.
Which would be really, really personally disappointing for me.
Yeah.
But that's the business of NFL football.
Yeah.
So whatever happened, it's one of the craziest weekends for a guy to Chris, you got a vote of confidence on Monday and you got fired on Thursday. That's the Matthew Smiley experience. You're like, wait, what? I thought I was killing it.
Yeah.
You believed in me. He goes, yeah, well, that was Monday.
Yeah. I say a lot of things.
In comes probably the best case scenario, special teams coordinator Chris Tabor.
Yeah.
I think that there was a lot of directions that could have gone, and part of me was scared about the guy from the Broncos. If only because the Broncos have assets, just like the Bills have had, invested in their special teams units specific to what that guy wants to do. If you were to take him, Kwiatka, out of Denver and put him somewhere else, does that mean we're doing more retooling of the special? And I mean, maybe that's what's necessary, but
sure.
I don't love that. Can you get me a guy who's done a lot with a lot of different types of players, who's very experienced, not just 6-7 years, but like, well, what? I think Tabor's been a coach in the NFL for what? What is it? Chris, give it a
long time, but he also was a head coach.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
13
which
years
again,
as a special teams coordinator.
Yeah, which again adds to that,
depth of
experience.
experience.
Can Sean focus on being a head coach because now he's got guys that have been there, done that at his other positions.
And he's known for being a very good special teams coordinator.
Yeah. Yep.
I like the move because what you did was, instead of going for a young and not young, but quick
up and coming. Yeah.
Up and coming. No. There's no time for up and coming.
Yep.
This fits the theme of, I want highly accomplished. I want tenured, highly accomplished people in my building acting as my assistant coaches. Mm-hmm. Because ultimately that's going to be the way we fix these things.
Yep.
Yeah, one of the plays I think back to is that blocked punt for a touchdown against the Rams that you could argue cost us the game.
Yep.
You take a look at some of the ways that, like Matthew Smiley reacting to that and the way he answered some of those questions during the week from reporters. Again, you want to talk about a guy not taking accountability for things. It's like, look, that's your unit. How do they not know how to block?
Yeah.
Or if those guys can't block against that kind of pressure, why are they out there?
Yep. Yep.
Pat McAfee with his whole thing about calling that guy who got blocked by Karlaftis on the kick block for Denver, where he's like, that guy's a fish. He doesn't belong out there on the field.
Yeah.
And they knew that this kick protection was going to be a problem, and that's why the Chiefs targeted it in the one moment they had to. How much of that comes back to bite the Buffalo Bills in the ass on special teams over the years, where you hear other teams pointing out, hey, Isaiah McKenzie puts the ball on the carpet. We're gonna kick to him and attack that.
Yeah. We don't have enough guys on the field.
How many times do you think they watched
block.
tape and said, hey, if we come right up the middle at the Bills on a punt return, we could probably get him?
Yeah.
You think that wasn't practiced?
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. All that stuff's
it's not a
practiced.
fluke.
Yeah.
I like the fact that you have a tenured coach who's seen it all. So he coaches it all pretty well and says, look, these are situational things where I bet you I can put the right mix of guys out there to make sure that doesn't happen again.
And he's had good units. I mean, he's had good punt, kick, and then return units. Like, I know for the Bears, he had really good units. And I think, was he, Chris, oh, you got it pulled up. Because I think he was Josh Cribbs, right? Didn't he have Cribbs when he was in Cleveland? Cribbs was
in 2011.
Yeah, Cribbs was a Pro Bowler for him. And he had Phil Dawson. Remember when Phil Dawson resurrected his career? That was with Tabor. So, I mean, again, from a player development standpoint, like, how do we get the most out of guys that maybe we're not going to be paying a lot of money, or maybe we're drafting late in the draft? Like, how do we maximize their value?
Cribbs was there for 2 years.
Yeah, but I think he was a Pro Bowler one of the years he was there.
It would have been 11 or 12.
Yeah. So
it's that concept of, you as a franchise have come from a place where you've had your choice of things. You're not a young franchise, but you still have some star power. You've also intentionally opened a window where you can maintain a young core of a football team that just went to the AFC title game.
Right.
With that in mind, it's going to be hard, right? Mm-hmm. You're probably not doing what the Eagles did this year. Like Greg Thompson had a tweet earlier where it was ranking how many void years teams actively have against their salary cap right now. The Eagles just won the Super Bowl with $340 million in void years on their cap in totality.
Yeah.
The teams directly behind them are San Francisco, New Orleans, Cleveland. It's like, you can compete at that level and not be in this world. And that's what Bean talks about when he says he wants to always be cap solvent and never be tearing down. He doesn't want to waste Josh's prime with all these fancy contract machinations like void years that ultimately leave him with no players and no cap. With that in mind, the only way around that is development.
Yeah.
And so these things show that the team is shifting its philosophy in terms of, okay, this is probably our last 5-year window.
Yeah.
To really go win a Super Bowl with Josh Allen, maybe 2. We have to get better at not just maximizing the talent that we bring in, but also the scheme that we utilize them in.
Right.
Maximize this thing so that we can get by with less. And I mean, I don't know how you could argue with any of that. I think if anything, these should be exciting things for Bills fans.
Yeah, I mean, you're filling your coaching staff out with guys who have a track record and who are, by all accounts, either player development guys or scheme guys or just guys that have been around the block, right? Like a Tabor. He's just been around the block. He's had good units. He knows how to maximize the talent that he's got. You've got Pellegrino, who knows how to develop players, especially in the secondary, which is something you've been lacking. And then you've got a guy in Nielsen who just is a scheme guy, right? And he's, again, called defenses. He can help Babbage with some of those things. Timely blitzes. When do we make these shows? When do we do what Spagnuolo did to us in the AFC title game, which is show, back off, and now we're going to bring it in the most important moment of the game? Mm-hmm. Like, how do you win, as Mario from Hashtag says, how do you win that game within the game? Yep. Because you're getting your ass kicked against Kansas City
Yeah.
We went over the stats, right? The last 5 years, you've gotten your ass kicked in the game within the game. And you got to figure out how to get better because they're not going anywhere, right? It's the Chiefs, it's the Bengals, it's the Ravens. Like these teams aren't going anywhere.
So with that said, there is evolution, even for those of you who are still frustrated about Sean McDermott's lack of a championship. There is signs of evolution in this process, and that should have everybody excited.
But not like a Mark Jindrak type of evolution.
More of a Batista or a Randy Orton evolution. More of those guys. Yeah.
What a note to end the podcast on. Guys, this has been a lot of fun, and it's been a lot of fun to talk about and watch occur. And I can't wait to see how that colors some of the rest of the decision-making that's going to take place this offseason. Now, as we get ready to get out of here, Ryan, where can everybody follow your work, and where can they follow your stuff over on hashtag?
Yeah, so follow me on Twitter at Ryan Lasel _RSN, and then obviously Rockpile Report. You guys have me on all the time, but if you're looking for quite a bit of content, hashtag sports on YouTube, hashtag sports on X, Twitter, whatever you want to call it, but. Make sure you give those guys a follow over there. I'm on quite a bit.
The Nation.
It sounds like there's a groundswell. Spoiler alert. There's a bit of a groundswell going on with hashtag Nation where they think I should have my own show on the network. So spoiler alert there. More to come. Maybe we're seeing if Paul and Mario feel comfortable giving me the keys to the kingdom to run my own show. But it's been more than one member of hashtag Nation that's mentioned that. So more to come. I know we're going to be doing some fun stuff. Here in the off season and then heading into the season again. So appreciate you guys listening and appreciate the support on X and on YouTube as well.
Guys, this has been fun, but for tonight, we got to get the hell out of here. I'm Drew Gear. That's Chris Krueger. It's Ryan Lasel. This has been your Rockpile Report.